So what's going to happen in this video? There's a question. We just talked about questions last week, and we ask a lot of questions during the interview, but we also get questions asked of us during the interview as well, don't we? We get asked a lot of questions, and sometimes we answer those, and the answer isn't necessarily very good. What are some of the questions we get asked? We get asked, what's going to happen to me? Are you going to have to tell my boss about this? Am I going to go to jail? How is this going to affect my career? Those type of questions we get asked all the time. Now, the question for you is, do you answer those questions or do you respond to those questions? A lot of times when we answer those questions, the answer we provide takes away our power and authority in the interview room. Remember, the number one reason people tell us what they did is because of the credibility and confidence of the interviewer. So if we're in that room and we're saying, well, I can't answer that, it's not up to me, that's the judge's decision, that's the attorney's decision, we are taking away responsibility of ours and putting it on someone else. Now, those are absolutely good answers because that is true. We cannot do some of those things, but we should be responding to questions rather than answering them. So we need to think about a couple things when we're in that interview room. And again, remember the first couple of weeks I talked about listening and I talked about planning, and both of those become imperative here. We have to listen to the real meaning of the question being asked, and we should do some planning up front because we can prepare for some of the questions we're going to be asked. So we need to look for the opportunity in those questions to practice reciprocity and move the interview in a positive direction. So response formulation is very important. Some of the responses that we can come up with, some of the ones that I've used over time, I've probably got 20 of them that I've probably used 100 times each. We changed the specifics, but the response is very applicable for certain questions we get asked. And we should work on those. We should also recognize there's a cognitive effect to a good response. If we want to put more a cognitive load on that interviewee, our response can have that effect. The other thing we need to consider, and we need to consider this up front in planning, but also this during the interview itself, is what are the fears of the person we're interviewing? What fears are motivating them? What fears are driving them to ask the question? That issue of fear becomes very important that we should be considering at all times during the interview. So I just want to speak to one issue here, and it's something that I call the time responsibility continuum, because what really goes on is a lot of the questions that we get asked in the interview room are future-based questions. They're somewhere down the road. They're beyond the scope of the interview room in which we sit. So think about some of the questions we get asked. What's going to happen to me? Am I going to get prosecuted? Am I going to lose my job? Do you have to tell my boss? All of those questions are where? Somewhere down the road. The other thing about those questions is they shift responsibility from the interviewee to the interviewer, because now it's your responsibility to respond to this question that is future based. Now, I don't know about you, and I think this is pretty consistent across the board. If I knew what was going to happen in the future, I would have bought one of those Powerball tickets and I wouldn't even be here standing before you. I'd be on some island somewhere basking in the, $150 million I won. So we can't really predict the future. So we're already given an onerous task when we're asked those future-based questions. So if we don't answer those questions, which we can't, a lot of them, because we don't have the ability to answer for other people's responsibility, we can have that perception that we're powerless, that we don't know what's going on in those situations. I've had an interview before where this person was asking those future-based questions, and the interviewer continued to say, well, I can't answer that. That's not up to me. That's going to be somebody else's decision, to the point where the interviewee eventually said, well, can you get somebody in here that knows what they're doing and can answer questions? That's not the perception we want in that interview room if the number one reason people tell us what they did is credibility and confidence of who we are. So we need to hear those questions. We have to be good listeners to hear them. We need to hear those questions as they're coming out. Recognize on that time clock that they're future-based questions. Bring in the response the time frame back to the present and shift the responsibility back from you to the interviewee. So it's a two-step process. Bring it back to the present and then shift the responsibility back to the interviewee. So when we do this, give this response, we facilitate a return to themes and getting back to what we're there focusing on in order to move this interview in a positive direction. It appears to increase the interviewer's credibility and trust because you're addressing the issue, you're not blowing off the issue, although you really haven't responded to the issue itself. And the individual that you're talking to may see the benefits and empowerment of participating with you because of this, and your control and strategy that you're attempting to use in the interview room is maintained. You can continue to do it. So it's a good thing to do. So let me give you an example of this, and then we'll close out here. If you're asked what's going to happen to me, I think the easiest thing to do is have a narrative, be able to tell a story, be able to dialogue with the person you're talking to, have a narrative worked out in your mind. And this is where I say I have like 20 of them I can use over and over again. And the response to what's going to happen to me? Hey, look, using their name, using thank yous a lot. We're drawing on all sorts of topics we can talk about here. So say, thank you for asking that. James, I want you to understand that I can't predict the future. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I may even use that Powerball example as part of that. But I can tell you this. I came here today to talk to you. You and I sitting down and have this conversation and get to the truth of the matter. Because the truth is what's going to allow this to move forward. You don't want somebody else making a decision when you haven't had the opportunity to tell your side of the story. So I'm here to get your side of the story. So back to the question I'm asking. So I have responded to the issue, brought it back to the present time, and put the responsibility back on the individual that I'm talking to. And we can use this over and over and over again. And we need to be focused on that as a very positive thing for us to do. So what do we do going forward from here? How do we use this to our benefit? Well, here's a couple things I would ask you to consider. When you consider the way that you do interviews, and this isn't an investigation, audit, inspection, whatever it is, if you're interviewing somebody and we're getting asked questions, are we answering those questions or are we responding to those questions? Usually the answers are going to take the authority and the power away from it and shift it to someone else, which I don't want to do. Are we ready with a response to bring the interview back to the present and focus upon the objectives that we're there for? So do we answer them or respond to them in order to do that? We want to respond to them. Do we use them as an opportunity to practice reciprocity and move the interview in a positive direction? You can make your answer appear to provide an opportunity for the person that you're interviewing that it's beneficial for them. And then in planning, do we consider the fears that may be present for response? So we can consider those fears up front and have some preparation in mind as to how we're going to deal with this, but we have to listen to hear what those fears are in the interview room. And then finally, are we developing a list of responses to most asked questions? You know, those responses to those questions we get asked over and over again, where we can tell a story, pull that individual in on that story, return to the present, put the responsibility back on the interviewee and move ahead. That's really what we want to do here. And so those are some steps that we can take in order to move ahead and make a difference in this interview. So I thank you for being here today. We've covered a lot of subjects. Like I said, last week we covered questioning, we've done rapport, we've done planning, we've done active listening. We're going to probably move on and talk a little bit about how do we handle denials in the interview room. If there's any topic you want me to cover, reach out to me and let me know. I would love to hear about it. If you're watching this on YouTube, hey, don't fail to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of these. Give me a like, drop me a line. I'd be glad to respond to you. Get out there, have a great week, but most of all, be safe out there. Thank you.